Okay, so welcome to the Pandemic Book Club. My name is Luke Epplin. I'm the author of Our Team, the epic story of four men in the World Series that changed baseball. I'm very pleased to be joined by Benjamin Hochman. Ben's book just came out. It is called 11 and 11, a hometown hero, La Russa's last ride in red, and a miracle World Series for the St. Louis Cardinals. Benjamin Hochman is a sports columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And from what I understand, he also is a local boy who grew up in that St. Louis area. So let's start with that biography first. You're from St. Louis, so I'm not going to ask sort of your, how you got to where you are. Let's just start with this. What did the St. Louis Cardinals mean to you when you were growing up there?
Well, if I can instantly make it as cheesy as possible, I used to say that people ask me where I grew up, I would say section 244 at Busch Stadium, row nice. 5, seat 1. And, our family shared season tickets there. And obviously my dad would take me to games and it was so much fun. And I learned the game, but my dad, he loves baseball, but he, more than like the stats and more than the intricacies of it, he loves the history and the personalities that make baseball baseball. And that definitely rubbed off on me. And now as a sports columnist, like, of course, I'll make reference to WOBA and bring up BABIP and whatever acronyms I need to tell a story. But I really like just telling a story with anecdotes and personalities. And that's what I got to do in this book.
Yeah, you certainly did. Let's definitely talk about that pretty soon. But I want to sort of stay with like baseball in St. Louis because I'm from that area. I'm from a small town called Litchfield, Illinois. I too grew up in a family that sort of split season tickets among several different individuals. So I'd go to maybe like 5 or 10 Cardinal games a year. And baseball was just central to my being. And you say in the first chapter of your book that there are similarities between what the Cardinals mean to St. Louis and what the Saints mean to New Orleans, or even the Packers mean to Green Bay. And a lot of people in St. Louis say, kind of surprisingly for the Midwest, that St. Louis has the best fans in baseball. And so I'm sort of curious about hearing you talk about this. Why do the Cardinals hold such a special place for fans in St. Louis? And what is it about St. Louis that makes it such a particularly great baseball town?
And I'll tell you, I feel, Luke, that after leaving St. Louis to live in the aforementioned New Orleans, and then I lived in Denver too as a journalist, it only gave me a greater appreciation for how Cardinals fans appreciate the Cardinals. Yeah. And just seeing how other fan bases approach the love that they have for their teams. And I say that there's something like an heirloom. It's almost like an heirloom passed down and I say St. Louis, but of course you're from Illinois and they call it Cardinals country all throughout right. the Midwest where people grew up. And it's an heirloom. It's passed down like a gold watch, this love of the St. Louis Cardinals. And also from a more historical standpoint, and you probably know all this, but maybe some of the listeners and viewers don't, is the growth of KMOX radio, this megawatt station out of St. Louis, 11:20 a.m. was so powerful, and the reach was so powerful that in the 20s and 30s and 40s, before TV took off, the Cardinals became like the team of the Midwest because that was the loudest, the strongest signal there was. So if you grew up in Southern Iowa, if you grew up in Western Illinois, I'm just making up places, but like inevitably that's where they heard the Cardinals games. And that's why thus families would pass down this love for this baseball team that was 100 miles away.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, we used to take vacations to Rocky Mountain National Park. We had a camper. And so we'd all get in the station wagon and sort of make this long trek from Illinois to Colorado. And literally KMOX stayed on the air that entire journey. By the time that we made it into Colorado, you could still hear the Cardinals games and Jack Buck's voice. So yeah, it extended forever almost.
Yeah, totally. And then the power of the brewery, if you will, St. Louis's Anheuser-Busch Brewery, so much promotion, cross promotion of the team. And then they bought the team. I forgot what year it was. I believe it was in the 1950s that the Busch family, got in charge. And so now you got this like powerhouse company promoting the Cardinals, and you've got this powerhouse radio station shooting off the voice. And oh, by the way, like you mentioned, the voice of the Cardinals, Jack Buck, and also Harry Carey. I mean, these were the best in the business. I mean, I'm obviously Vince Scully's really good too, and some of the other voices are good, but Jack Buck and Harry Carey were iconic voices. So that's really how, similar to the way you ask someone maybe in the South why the Braves are their favorite team, they'll say like, oh, because TBS in the 80s blew up and it was the only Southern team we got to watch. You know, similarly in the Midwest, that's how the Cardinals grew to such prominence.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, and I definitely hear you. Like Jack Buck, Mike Shannon, that's the voice of my childhood throughout. Your book is focused on the 2011 World Series, but it's also focused very specifically on a specific game, the Game 6 from that 2011 World Series. Now, there have been tremendous iconic moments in the Cardinals. We can talk about sort of the Game 7 of the 1946 World Series. We can talk about what happened in 1964. We can talk about what Bob Gibson did in 1968, all of these sorts of things. But what I really liked about your book was that it really kind of honed in on what that game meant and shaped and affected the lives of so many people in that city. I know personally myself that if I'm ever sort of feeling down or sort of need a lift, I will literally go onto YouTube and just watch fan videos, the people that had sort of recordings of that David Freese at bat at the end of Game 6, and just the crowd going crazy once it happened. And it's sort of almost feeling like an earthquake among them. I mean, it just cheers me up every time, even though I know what is going on or what's going to happen. And so the thing that I sort of want to sort of explore a little bit is why that game. Like, what is the sort of importance that game has taken on, not only for the Cardinals but for the entire city?
Yeah. So when you look at Game 6 of the 2011 World Series, there's obviously many factors that come into it that made this moment that now in St. Louis, our city is pretty divided politically, and there's a lot of this going, or a lot of more like this going on in St. Louis, anger and frustration about a lot of things. But anybody on either side has a Game 6 story. The Cardinals really bring the city together when there's a lot of anger going on in our town, and that's a beautiful thing that baseball can provide. So basically, to set it up, first of all, the Cardinals, everyone talks about, so many World Series, so many pennants and the whole thing, but like they were in a situation, so they won it all in 06. So that was awesome for them. That was their 10th World Series in 06. 07 and 08 didn't make the playoffs. 09 make the playoffs, but get swept in the first round. And then in 10, they stunk again. So if you're a fan of a team, that is a pretty long stretch of they literally didn't win a playoff game and of a lot of frustration. So heading into the 2011 season, knowing it was Albert Pujols' last contractual season for St. Louis, there was a lot of urgency. Like, this is it, guys. Like, if there's ever a chance or ever a time to win it all, or at least make the playoffs and make a run, it's 2011. Oh, and then they get down 10 and a half games on August 25th, and it looked over. So there was so much, there was a meek attitude around town. And then the magic started stirring. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that run. But as we get to Game 6, so now that team 10 and a half out is in Game 6 of the World Series. The game, of course, is in St. Louis. The team is down 3-2. And, fingernail, nobody in St. Louis had fingernails at that point, or at least by the 10th inning. There were no fingernails in St. Louis at that point. And so here's the other thing. The hero was David Freese. And David Freese could have been from Botswana, and he would forever be St. Louis's hero because he did the things. But he's from St. Louis. Yeah. It's like, what are the odds that the guy that did the most magical thing and then somehow eclipsed it 2 innings later? Because for those that don't know, he hits the triple with 2 outs, 2 strikes in the bottom of the ninth to tie the game and keep the Rangers from winning the World Series. And then in the 11th inning, he, of course, hits a walk-off home run to win Game 6. Like I said, he could have been from anywhere in the world. And at that moment, as that baseball landed on what I call Freese's lawn, the batter's eye in center field, once that ball landed there, he was a St. Louis icon. And the fact that he's from here, the fact that everybody's got a story. Oh, I remember him growing up. Somebody I interviewed in the book, his mom was my teacher in school. I mean, St. Louis is a big, small town. One of our guys was the guy. Oh my gosh. And of course they had to win Game 7 too, or else I might not have written the book. They had to win Game 7, and they did, of course. And here we are 10 years later talking about the excitement.
Yeah, I mean, it really is extraordinary. And for readers that don't know, Game 6 refers to Game 6 of the 2011 World Series. The Cardinals are down 3-2. They are down 2 runs in the 9th inning. They have 2 outs, 2 men on base, and 2 strikes against David Freese. He does hit a triple that ties it. The Cardinals come back again in the 10th to tie the game on a Lance Berkman single, and then they win it in the 11th on a David Freese home run. It really is, I mean, a game that probably we'll never see the likes of again. We're talking about David Freese here. Now, I think he is the most interesting person in the book. You do such a great job of sort of painting his personality, because there's just so many interesting things we can talk about. For one thing, his path to baseball was not smooth at all. And once he gets there, it's not smooth then either. Can you talk a little bit about how the sort of hiccups he has on the road to 2011?
Yeah, it's the fact that he even made it to the major leagues makes for an amazing story in itself, as you kind of set it up there. We're talking about a guy who was a really good high school player, but just got burnt out on the game. And we see it with different athletes, and he got burnt out on the game. So he went to University of Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri, the big state school. That's the school that had recruited him really hard, but he didn't go to play baseball. He just went as a student. And I interviewed the coach of the team, who's like, gosh, like I got like the best player at the school isn't on my team, basically, if you will, so to speak. And that was frustrating. But David Freese rediscovered his love for the game while at a college age. So he goes to a community college in St. Louis, and then he goes to a smaller school in Alabama. He does get drafted, and he's in the Padres organization, and he's working his way up. And then he gets this phone call, and at first he thinks it's a joke. He thinks it's his buddy doing a prank on him, but it's the actual general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals telling David Freese he's been traded to the Cardinals organization. Oh, and by the way, he's been traded for Jim Edmonds, one of his favorite players and a fan favorite. And there's a story in the book about when he texts his buddy at a bar and tells him the trade happened. He's like, "Who'd we trade?" "Ooh, Edmonds, huh?" Like he's like simultaneously excited that his buddy's going to be a Cardinal, but kind of like, all right, you got to live up to Edmonds now.
Right.
That's a great player. And Freese, of course, works his way up and makes the Cardinals, but he also battles demons. He's an alcoholic, and he's admitted it after the 2011 season. He battles demons, and they're tough on him, and he battles depression, and he's open about it. There's an amazing article with the reporter Bob Nightingale that I talk about in the book, where David just kind of says it all and talks about the depths of hell his mind was in. And a lot of that was after the World Series. But even before the World Series, he had been arrested for a DUI in St. Louis. I interviewed the cop who arrested him. And that's an interesting story in itself. We got this St. Louis Cardinals fan arresting a St. Louis Cardinals player. Just the idea of like, he loves this team. He's obviously going to do his job as a police officer. But then he watches Freese go on and become a ball player, and he was very proud of his perseverance. So it's an interesting story, and it's definitely not your typical like got drafted and worked my way up and here I am.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really liked about the way you framed him in the book is that it really opened up a discussion that we're having more and more in professional sports about the mental health of
Yeah.
athletes. You saw before Game 6, David Freese is battling sort of whether he even likes the sport. I mean, the fact that he drops it in college and doesn't play it, and then he's sort of dealing with alcoholism. And then I thought one of the most interesting things that you say afterwards is that after Game 6, whenever he becomes this iconic hero in St. Louis, really just can't go anywhere without fans wanting to talk to him about where they were during Game 6 and what that meant to him. It takes a mental toll on him.
No question. Yeah.
And I think that fans are, I mean, I certainly had a hard time thinking about that and what that would mean to suddenly lose your anonymity to such an extent that you have to become this symbol to everybody. And it sounds like Freese really struggled with that.
Yeah, no question about it. And he did these beautiful things in the public eye after winning the World Series. Did some surprise charity work and visited a young girl in the hospital and dressed up as Dr. David Freese. And he did a lot of these events. And he went back to his old high school and signed personalized autographs. And those types of anecdotes show how much he just cares about touching people. Yeah. But for every few people he touches, there's also the avalanche of everyone coming at him at all times. And there was a lot of pressure and a lot of people reaching out. And he liked to drink and he liked to go out, and he was handsome 27-year-old star player on the Cardinals. Let's not forget, he was literally an all-star the next year. So not only was he a World Series hero, but for a while there, he was a legit major leaguer. And he's living that life that a lot of people dream and think is a dream. But for him, it was partially a dream, but partially a nightmare.
So fascinating. Yeah. I mean, it seems like you could write an entire other book about sort of what that is that he had to deal with, because it's such a unique emotion to do. Branching out to some of these other people that we're talking about, if we're going to stay on sort of Game 6, as we mentioned, David Freese hits the triple in the 9th inning that sends the game into extra innings. While there, Josh Hamilton of the Texas Rangers, whom the Cardinals are playing, hits a 2-run homer off of Jason Mott. And in the next inning, just amazingly, the Cardinals come back, but it's not David Freese that is the hero this time. It's a guy named Lance Berkman. With Berkman, I want to kind of talk about two things. One, you keep emphasizing in this book the sort of chemistry that Cardinals team in 2011 had. And I think Berkman is a big part of it. So can we talk about how Berkman was a part of that, and just what other sort of chemistry you're talking about whenever you talk about that?
And it's interesting you bring that up, because myself as a sports columnist, I can be very, I guess, like hesitant or even negative when you hear the old cliches about a team that has great clubhouse chemistry, or how the big speech, like players only meetings. You always see these articles about how the team was bad, they had a players only meeting, and then they won. So I'm like, why doesn't every team always have players only meetings? Right. Apparently that's how you do it. Yeah. So I approached this. I didn't approach this like happy-go-lucky. I approached it with a skeptical eye. All right, if you're telling me that he's truly a clubhouse guy, and like explain why. And there were some cool reasons that showed how Lance Berkman and some of these other guys just kind of fit together. And one of them was just simply the fact that, I mean, clearly there's different languages and stuff, but there was a lot of interaction with the different nationalities in the Cardinals clubhouse there, and they'd all go to dinner together, and that was important too. You see factions in a lot of current and past teams too. You just see it, and the Cardinals did a good job of just kind of bringing everyone together. And you have a personality like Lance Berkman, who's not only the kind of the biggest personality and the biggest goofball, but also like the most confident guy, but he's also a family man. Oh, and he's also the second best player on the team. He actually led the team in OPS that year. A little trivia there, who led the team in OPS? It wasn't Albert Pujols. So you got this guy that had all these qualities. He's really likable. And he kind of, I'm not saying he's Reggie Jackson on the Bronx Zoo Yankees he's not the straw that stirred the drink, but he was a very important person in that clubhouse. And because of that, when the team was down 10.5, it wasn't like, all right, let's start making plans for November and even October vacation wise. It's like, you know what? Like, we're not that bad. Like, we can chip away at this. And he kind of helped keep the spirits up. And he, of course, wasn't alone. There's guys like Nick Punto, the shredder, who during the season would literally walk up behind players in the hotel lobby and rip off their shirts off their backs. Though Kyle McClellan pointed out, the relief pitcher, that some guys wised up and started wearing the Western style shirts with the snap buttons, so the shirt wouldn't break with the buttons flying. And shredder Nick Punto also shredded his teammates after walk-off wins. So there's a reason why David Freese's jersey in the Cardinals Hall of Fame is ripped in half, because the shredder ripped it. Again, it's not like general manager John Mozeliak sat down before the season. It's like, all right, I need a shredder. I need a goofball. But he definitely knew that there were some toxic players from previous teams that maybe impeded the growth of the community that was the Cardinals. And he put in some personalities that help plant seeds and help it blossom.
Yeah. I mean, one of the sort of more audacious things that he did was he traded Colby Rasmus mid-season in a trade that I myself, along with a lot of other Cardinal fans, were like, oh my, what is he doing? He got back a couple of relievers and Corey Patterson, and you're just sort of like, Colby Rasmus could still be a star. But he was thinking of what you said there, the chemistry of the clubhouse.
Yeah, Colby didn't necessarily fit in with everybody, and he was kind of his own guy. And he was underachieving too. And they similar to what I said earlier, they looked at it and were like, we got to win this year. This is our last chance with Albert Pujols, most likely. Let's do this. And so you would, at the time, baseball fans and experts and media members assumed that if Colby Rasmus was going to be traded, it would be for young prospects coming up that the Cardinals could groom themselves over the years. But instead, like you mentioned, they got Octavio Dotel, Edwin Jackson, you mentioned Corey Patterson, and Mark Zepsinski, and who they called Scrabble. Great nickname, because his name just has every letter in the alphabet. Though the best nickname along those lines was, and I don't know how to pronounce it, maybe you can help me out, Luke. It was a player named Doug, like GWODSZ, and they called him iChart. His nickname was iChart.
I remember that. Yeah, that's
one of the best nicknames in baseball. But the reason Mozeliak made that trade was to get specific pieces that he felt could enhance the 2011 Cardinals. And he got the two setup guys, and he got Edwin Jackson, who was an innings eater. And those guys contributed majorly down the stretch there, and now they all have rings.
Yeah, they certainly did. One more thing on Lance Berkman was, because I am a giant Cardinals fan, as I mentioned, I've seen the Game 6 many times. The one thing that I really remember about Berkman's at bat when he tied the game in the 10th was that he comes to the plate and he looks like he's stepping up to a game in like mid-May. And whenever he gets the hit that ties the World Series game, it's basically the dream of every single person ever picked up a bat. He's on first base, and he's like taking off his batting gloves and leaning over to listen to his first base coach, as though it was just another one of his hits that he'd ever gotten. And it's an extraordinary thing to see someone like that. And it's really like, you know, a great veteran move. He'd been around the block. He'd seen everything at that point, and he was not intimidated by the moment at that time.
Yeah. And moreover, he shares a story in the book just about how he just felt this calmness over the body, over his body. And it was interesting because he shared an anecdote that made me smile while hearing it in the interview. Was he watched Game 6, this game we're talking about, with his family during the pandemic in 2020. Basically, it was just on because, you know, they were showing old games when there weren't real games going on. And he's like, let's sit down and watch as a family. He has 4 daughters and his wife. And Lance said that Lance was getting nervous watching it. Like, you're going to win, Lance. You're on the team. You know what happens. But that's how much he cared.
He's more nervous watching the game, according to the interview that you did with him, than he was when he was at bat.
Exactly.
That sort of calmness that he talks about with you in the book is like, where does it come from? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
real puzzler.
It was, I mean, and it's almost like it almost plays in. So basically, like you said, he just feels this calm over him, like, all right, I know what to do. I know how to swing. I'm going to get a hit here.
Yeah.
And it almost plays into the kind of like the underlying storyline that there was just kind of like this magic involved with this team. And
Yeah.
as if like Lance Berkman steps up to the bat, he just feels this presence that's going to allow him to get the hit. And David Freese twice working this magic. And
Yeah.
again, I mean, magic clearly there's no magician that's making it happen, but it's fun
Right.
from a storytelling standpoint to be like, the way these things happen for the 2011 Cardinals are just like inexplicable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that magic is sort of an ineffable word and something that we apply to something when we can't describe it any other way. But the way that you talk about it in the book is that even the announcers, Joe Buck and Tim McCarver, like Joe Buck, whenever Lance Berkman gets the hit, is just kind of like stops and there's this long pause and he's like, they just won't go away. It's just like,
Yeah.
there's no other explanation for this. Like, we don't really understand what's happening, but like, I mean, what can you even say? Almost.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they just won't go away. And on the other side of it, if you're talking about what you would think would be a predestined team or a team destined for winning it, it's the Texas Rangers, who had
Right.
never won a World Series. And the year before, they make the World Series and lose it, but they return the next year. And like their seventh hitter is better than most teams' cleanup hitter. I mean, that lineup was just an OPS monster.
Yeah.
And so for all these Texas fans, Rangers fans, like this is their moment. Finally, they're
Yeah.
down to 2 strikes in the 9th inning. Oh gosh, we let off a triple to some guy named Freese. Whatever, we'll get it back. Oh, we'll get it back in grand style. We'll get a 2-run homer, I believe it was from Hamilton, our guy. And
Yeah.
then they blow it again, and then again. It's just like I feel for those fans, no question about it.
It's inexplicable. I just wrote a book on the Cleveland Indians, and that is sort of a team that is cursed by fate, and the fans are sort of waiting for the roof to fall in at every minute. And I feel like the Cardinals are one of those franchises that, like, they consistently beat clubs that they shouldn't beat. I mean, you can look at the 2011 playoffs. They probably should have lost to the Phillies, who I think, as you mentioned, the Phillies rotation is just unbelievable. It's like Cliff Lee and Roy Halladay and Roy Oswalt and all these people. They really should have lost. And then the Brewers, who at that, I remember in 2011 looking at the Brewers and being like, this is the team of destiny. They have all these fun guys on the team, and like it just seemed like they were just mashing. Then the Cardinals kind of handled them pretty easily. So it's like every step of the way, it seems like the Cardinals should lose, and they just don't.
They just don't. They won't go away, like you and Joe Buck said.
Yeah. Well, one of the big reasons, of course, is Albert Pujols. You had mentioned earlier in the discussion that Pujols at that time was in the last year of his contract, and he is on, I mean, one of the biggest tears in baseball from the last decade. I mean, there aren't very many comparable players that had the decade that he had just had, but he's in the last phase of his contract. And how much did that sort of weigh on both him and the Cardinals fans throughout that 2011 season?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that it goes through the brain every day, whether you're Albert, whether you're the general manager, whether you're the guy in section 244 with the cold beer. I mean, every time you see Albert, you're like, okay, he is amazing. Do we have him for another decade though? Can we get him for another decade? And and people would go to games in August. Is this the last time I'm going to see Albert Pujols? And so he has these different nicknames, and it's funny. The one that most people use for him is El Hombre, and he hates that. Why does he hate it? Because it's the man, and he respects Stan Musial, Stan the Man, so much that he doesn't want his nickname. His other nickname that people call him is the Machine. And maybe that's a little more apt because he's just like this machine that just goes up there and just doubles and homers. Yeah. And he was just amazing. And I would watch and you would watch and fans would watch as he would hit these opposite field doubles, opposite field homers and they didn't have the exit velocity right away. I'm like, that ball was hit harder than any pulled home run I've seen in a week. I mean, he was just this machine at the plate, and he came through time and time again.
Yeah, I grew up as a Chicago Bulls fan too, and I remember stories about Michael Jordan where like he would just like show up and be like, I'm getting 45 tonight, and then kind of go out and do that. And you kind of talk in the book about how Pujols would sort of be like, I'm going to hit one out tonight, and he would do it, and it was just this sort of intensity, or almost just sort of like willing himself to do it, to the point where if he got on a groove, like 2 for 4 could have been a bad night for him in some way. Like it was, I think that intensity was really kind of what defines him. And it's interesting because you also talk about that intensity with another player, which is Chris Carpenter. And it does seem like there's sort of a parallel level of intensity between the best pitcher and the best hitter on that team in some way. And maybe they weren't the most vocal individuals, but it was that intensity that sort of set the level.
No question. And I used to live in Denver, and a lot of people refer to a play called the helicopter play with John Elway. I don't know if you remember it, but it's in the first Super Bowl that they won against Green Bay. And similarly, they had never won the Super Bowl, and fans that adore the team and were waiting, and a fearless Elway jumps and he looks like a helicopter, in the air, but he makes the play, and he of course wasn't a scrambling quarterback or anything like that. So for him to show the cojones of that, kind of sums up that rise to the championship. And I've got a bobblehead. Where is it? Oh my gosh. Now I can't find it. I have a bobblehead of Chris Carpenter doing his version of that. And basically it's in game 1 of this World Series, and he's going to cover first, and the throw is terrible, and he dives forward, and the guy almost steps on his pitching hand, for goodness sake. The starting pitcher of your World Series team is headfirst sliding into first to make it out. He makes it happen. Like, it's one of those moments where it's like, today everyone would say, let's go. It's one of those intense moments that's like, wow, our best player just did that. And it fueled the team. And of course, he did other things such as outduel Roy Halladay in a 1-0 game in Game 5 of the NLDS. He was just an amazing pitcher who was a big game pitcher.
Yeah, I want to talk about that game because like we have been guilty of this too. We're talking solely about sort of Game 6 of the 2011 World Series because it has become the totemic game for St. Louis fans. But Game 5 of the NLDS against the Philadelphia Phillies is, in my mind, maybe not as sort of dramatic and miraculous, but like as sort of impactful as that game, because you've got Halladay, Carpenter, and I think if you have any other pitcher on that mound other than Chris Carpenter, the Cardinals season ends right there. Because, I'm not going to sort of, I'll let you talk about it, but like, I mean, can you walk us through what that game was, how the Cardinals managed to score, and then like how Carpenter, what it says about Carpenter as a player that he sort of willed that team to victory that day?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this team earlier, the 2011 Philadelphia Phillies, 100-win team. I mean, all the names we remember from that era were in their prime, doing great, and the pitching staff was unbelievable. And they get to Game 5 in the series, and the Cardinals score 1 in the first, and Chris Carpenter, as if he's like, that's all I need, just goes out there and just shuts down the Philadelphia Phillies in Philadelphia in the biggest game of the season. Pitches a complete game shutout, and he's just a bulldog out there. And of course, Yadier Molina made some key plays from behind the plate and calling the right pitches and stuff like that. And there are some good defensive plays and all that overall. But Chris Carpenter just like willed his team to victory, and it's just like one of those over the top things where it's like he refused to lose. Like whatever cliche you want to throw out there, he embodied in the biggest game of the season. And he was great friends with Roy Halladay. They were fishing buddies. They were two peas in a pod. They were former teammates in Toronto. They were similar guys in many regards. And of course, for them to be paired up against each other, you kind of mentioned it earlier. It's like, it's almost like there's these mini books within my book. Like,
I
I mean,
was
I
about
could
to
have,
say that. Yeah, you
yeah,
could write an entire book on Halliday Carpenter. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and plus, I mean, you could also write, I mean, we've mentioned this a lot of times when you've been talking about narrative and story and all that, but it just seems like everything aligns up so perfectly for the narrative in this story. It could have been Carpenter versus Cliff Lee in that last game, but it happens to
Right.
be Carpenter versus Halliday. They're best friends. They're about to go fishing together in the Amazon. And
Yeah,
it's like what more could you want as a writer than that
right.
sort of copy? It's
Yeah.
the
Oh
perfect
my
thing for a
gosh.
writer to dig their heels into.
Yeah,
Um,
it was there for me. All I could do was mess it up. I just let the story tell itself.
right. Well, the other pitcher that the Cardinals have at that time is Adam Wainwright, and he uh, doesn't really contribute to this season. What exactly happens to him this year?
That that's a fascinating storyline also. I mean, if you, and I'm making a proclamation here, but you could argue that he's in the conversation at least for best pitcher to ever have to best pitcher at that moment to have to undergo Tommy John. He had been, I believe, second in the Cy Young the previous 2 years, heading into that year, into the 2011 season. So we're like, here he is. Here's this master of pitching, Adam Wainwright, and for him to have Tommy John in 2011, naturally it was a big blow to the team.
Right.
But it's funny. So you think like, oh, so he's done. He's not part of the story, right? He's actually a pretty important part of the story, if only from a teammate standpoint. Again, we talked about the clubhouse. We talked about the chemistry. He was a big part of it. Because he was such a successful player and such a great guy, that his teammates still fed off him, and he was still a team leader, and he was also a great cheerleader. And when they were down 10.5, there was a speech he gave at a local dinner in St. Louis, and a lot of the Cardinals players and management was in the audience, and the Cardinals were at their lowest of low points in the season. And there's the most optimistic dude, Adam Wainwright, giving a speech saying, look, guys, if we win just a couple games here, suddenly Milwaukee's getting nervous, and we do this, and we're not. And he just had this, he has this ultimate optimism, and he still has it today at age 39 for the St. Louis Cardinals. He just believes, and he hopes that the things he believes in will occur more than not, if you will. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up perhaps the most important contribution he had to the team, and that was the magical fruit snacks. During the during the NLDS, he and Kyle McClellan were both not on the roster, injured, and the Phillies were winning, and they're in the clubhouse. So Adam Wainwright takes a pack of fruit snacks and throws it to McClellan and says, eat these. We need some runs. Mm. He's like, all right. So he takes it, he eats these fruit snacks. And as the story goes, the fruit snack hits the esophagus of McClellan in a Cardinal doubles or whatever it was. And the fruit snacks are indeed magical. And these fools are just chowing down during October, the whole month, just so many calories of fruit snacks. And of course, that's why the Cardinals won the World Series.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know what? I during that 2011 playoffs, I think I had a ginger ale before maybe game 2 of the Phillies or whatever, and the Cardinals won, and so then I would have a ginger ale before every single game, and it kind of didn't matter if they lost, because I was just like, well, yeah, but then if I don't do it the next game, maybe this would be the game they would win. So they ate a bunch of fruit snacks. I drank a lot of ginger ale.
Yeah,
we all have our opinions.
I don't know why you don't have a ring.
I really, yeah.
Why they didn't give you a ring?
Well, I think the key person that we haven't talked about right now is of course Tony La Russa. You have a really good line in your book that Tony La Russa was someone who was sort of expert at balancing intuition and integers. I got a good sense of La Russa from this book that I maybe didn't have sort of otherwise. I think that it's easy to parody him. It's easy to sort of think, particularly now that after what happened earlier in the season with the White Sox, it's easier to sort of think of him as just this sort of old school martinet. And you do kind of show that the players seem to be simultaneously in awe of, and maybe even a bit scared of him. There is sort of a charisma about him that the players respond to. So La Russa had been there for quite a while, and like what did he mean to that 2011 club? How did he keep all those personalities together and maintain that chemistry?
In sports, a lot of times we talk about great coaches, we don't talk about baseball managers. And maybe it's just because it's the word manage and they're managing as opposed to coaching, where the basketball coaches, if you will, in the huddle and all that, or the football coaches drawing up the plays and such. But Tony La Russa was an amazing coach. He knew which buttons to press. And he was of course, he was one of those guys that was early on kind of he loved the game and respected the game, and he was old school on his resume, but he was very innovative, notably with bullpens and notably with taking chances here and there. And there's a couple moments during that season where he did something that 29 other managers probably wouldn't have done with their own team, or even if they were managing St. Louis's team. But Tony did it, and it paid off. Even in one game, he starts Brandon Dixon, who was a minor leaguer, and it was a big game, but he started him thinking we can still somehow pull this game off. And most importantly, it also gives Carpenter another day's rest. So some people would be like, oh my God, he throws out this kid to get hit around. But what happened? The hitters of the Cardinals step it up. And is that psychological? I don't know, but the Cardinals were like, we've got some bad pitcher out there for us today that's not even really part of our team. Tony's throwing them out there. Let's do our best to get some runs. And Albert, I think, had like 23 RBIs or something ridiculous in this particular game, and they win the game. And of course, they needed every win to win that thing. So La Russa's super fascinating. And then of course the idea that he decides mid-season that it's going to be his last season. Oh, and then his consigliere, Dave Duncan, his best friend, his closest friend, is going through something with his wife, dealing with cancer, and Dave has to leave the team. So now La Russa's going through this stretch without his right-hand man. But they all persevere, and it leads to, and what's funny is, full circle for what you brought up, it leads to, at the time, the greatest ending of any coach's career in any sport. He wins game 7 at home and retires. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And
it's
then
like
he comes back.
Ending. Yeah.
Yeah. So from a managerial standpoint, that's the perfect way to end. And he comes back 10 years later for the White Sox, but they're doing pretty well. So
they are. Yeah, I mean, some of the things that in the World Series, Tony was somebody who was not sort of shy about using Alan Craig, who caught fire at that time. And he also inserts sort of Daniel Descalso and John Jay into the lineup in very interesting situations. And it just all seems to pay off. He has confidence in these younger guys, including another person from, I believe, maybe he's not, I can't remember, Adrian Chambers, who comes up sort of at the end of the season, and La Russa, to his credit, is pretty liberal in using him, and it pays off numerous times.
Yeah, and it wasn't like these names that you said were like baseball America's top prospects or anything like that. These were pretty, clearly they're major league talents, but these weren't like the Cardinals. The guys that the Cardinal fans were anticipating were guys like Colby Rasmus, who ended up getting traded from that team. But you mentioned players like Adrian Chambers and John Jay and Daniel Descalso, and these guys are part of St. Louis lore, because and that's another cool thing about the 2011 team in this book is that it, again, you mentioned Jordan, like, look, The Last Dance was amazing, and the stories of Jordan's Bulls teams are, like, to this day makes your hair rise on your arms. But like, how many players on the team truly contributed to the winning there? And I mean, 8, 7, 9. I mean, what, depending on if you count Randy Brown or Cliff Levinson. I mean, my point is, with this Cardinals team, there was like 35 guys, and obviously into the playoffs, like 20, 25, of course. And each dude had his moment. Each dude had a time where if he hadn't done what he did, they wouldn't have made the playoffs.
Right. So, we're running a little short on time, so let's get to some of these other things that I think are really interesting about your book. We've talked about how the Cardinals were down 10.5 games. They make this miraculous run to make the playoffs. The Atlanta Braves kind of collapse. Then they sort of somehow squeak by the Phillies, make it through the Brewers, and then face the Rangers. We've been talking a lot about Game 6, and one of the most interesting things about your book is that you end every chapter with a sort of anecdote, not from usually a famous person or from a player or anything like that, but just from kind of a resident talking about where they were during Game 6 and what that meant to them. And I'm sort of wondering how you came to that decision and what you think that added to your book that wouldn't just be, that was beyond just the sort of sport element of the book.
Yeah, I mean, right away. So Tony La Russa and Rick Hummel, a great Hall of Fame sports writer from St. Louis, they wrote a book on this team the very next year. Right. And it's a great book. And so the book was already written, if you will, about this team. So I'm like, if I'm going to write my own book about the 2011 Cardinals, I need new news. I need new things in there that the reader has not experienced before. Now, obviously, I'm going to write about David Freese and Chris Carpenter and stuff, but I was like, how can I provide a new element? And that was through fan stories. And there's so many, I mean, like I said, everybody in St. Louis has a Game 6 story, and some of them are just sitting on a couch eating fingernails and praying, and others are the guy in the Navy who's in a submarine, right, and a guy in the hospital who's fearing death, or a mother who's giving birth, and just all these just unbelievable stories of fans who are touched by this game, and how that moment kind of helped them through it. And that was a really fun aspect of the reporting and writing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things you say in there is that the question that everybody gets asked from St. Louis is, what high school did you go to? And you talked about how the new question is, where were you during Game 6?
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're saying it's sort of a uniting factor that can cross race, class, political affiliation, all of that sort of thing. It's something that the city can really, they can stitch people together, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the other interesting perspectives that you say in the book about Game 6 is you interview Mark Lowe, who is the pitcher from the Texas Rangers who gives up the home run to David Freese that ends the game. And he's given a pretty significant portion of the book to give his perspective on how that affected him and what it means to him now, 10 years out. And I was wondering why you felt that was important to go after Lowe and get his perspective.
Well, so I worked with somebody that helped me on the book is the journalist Eli Letterman, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring him up. He helped me a lot with the book. And when we got the Mark Lowe interview, we're like, well, first of all, it's as simple as like, this is good stuff. Yeah. This is great perspective. And I wanted, so basically Eli would bounce things off. And I'm like, look, I want to show a Rangers perspective on this, but I don't want to turn this into a half Cardinals, half Rangers book. And we found this player, this one guy who, of course, led off the Freese home run, but could also kind of speak for the Rangers, if you will. And he described the heartbreak in detail, and he used so much great vocabulary and so much emotion. And then there's this storyline that his family is from Illinois, just like you. Is one of the sides of his family grew up Cardinals fans, and when he was a kid, he would go to Illinois and visit grandma and grandpa and watch old VHS tapes of the St. Louis Cardinals. Oh, and his favorite video game growing up was a computer game called Tony La Russa Baseball. And I just really found this guy fascinating, and I was like, let's roll with him and use his voice a lot in the book.
Yeah, I think that added a great perspective to it. And I should also mention that you do a really wonderful job of stitching together not only that voice and sort of the things at the end of the chapter, but there are also sort of fan perspectives throughout the chapters that are sort of woven in, including, I think one of my favorite details in this book was when David Freese is going on this epic run, he's like sleeping on the couch of one of his friends' houses. And after the Game 6, I think it's Game 6, yeah, he beats his friend back to the house and is just watching a movie, and it's like
hanging out. Yeah. And it's ironic, or maybe irony is not the word. It's, for lack of a better word, it's interesting that the guy who ended up becoming known for partying didn't party on the night of Game 6 because he knew how important Game 7 was. Right. But yeah, I mean, I'll make the story quick. When you think of major leaguers, you just think of like rich people living a life that we don't live. But
Right.
the reality is, like, some of these guys are just dudes. They're in their 20s, and yeah, they might have a few 100,000 in the bank or millions even, but they're just dudes. And David Freese was moving, and he didn't have cable. And his buddy's like, "Why don't you stay with me for a couple of days until the cable gets going?" He's like, "It's worth it." And then, of course, the Cardinals start winning. It's in September, and he's like similar to you and the ginger ale. I can't
Right.
stop drinking it now. He
Yeah.
can't stop sleeping on this couch now. And so sure enough, throughout the playoffs, the guy that won the NLCS MVP was sleeping on a couch. And then sure enough, like you said, all of St. Louis, the night of Game 6, is out celebrating this accomplishment by David Freese, except for David Freese himself, who's watching TV, and his buddy comes home, opens the door, and there's Freese just sitting there. He's like, you did this, you did St. Louis. Oh my God. Like,
Right. The
I'm
whole
just
city
that,
is exploding around him, and he's just
yeah,
sitting there watching a movie. It's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you were responsible for all of this. Do you
Right.
fathom this? Unbelievable.
Amazing. All right.
Yeah.
So, last question here. You talked about how we had already mentioned this, that the new question in St. Louis is, where were you during Game 6? So we didn't ask this yet. Where were you, Benjamin, during Game 6?
It worked out perfectly. Like, obviously, I've since become the sports columnist for St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and even though there's a lot of Cardinals crap behind me, like, I've definitely like taken the fan hat off and kind of buried it and said, look, if I'm going to be a sports journalist, a sports columnist for the city's paper, my hometown paper, I can't be a fanboy. And that mindset has helped me on the last 6 years since I moved back to St. Louis. But in 2011, I was just a kid from St. Louis, a guy from St. Louis living in Denver. And I was covering the NBA. I was a beat writer, and the NBA was in a lockout. And I was the only one happy about this lockout because there was no training camp, which meant I didn't have to go to a specific assignment every day. So I was able to sneak back home and go to the World Series. And a buddy of mine were in the last row of the right field bleachers watching Game 6.
Wow. So you were there.
I was there.
Wow. I imagine that's an experience you're always going to remember.
It's like I tried to explain in the book, like the feeling of watching the Freese triple and the Freese home run is this experience that you can't buy. No drug or drink can make you feel or recreate it. It was just this experience that I was fortunate to have go through my body, and I'll remember it forever.
That's amazing. Well, your book, 11 and 11, it's perfect for recreating the season, or if you're not a Cardinals fan like we are, but just want to sort of find out about one of the most miraculous runs that ever happened in baseball history. This is a great one for you. This has been for the Pandemic Book Club, and thank you so much, Benjamin Hochman.
Thanks for having me.
All right.